Before we get started, I just want to say that if you like the kind of content that I'm making and you want to help me make more content like this, then the absolute best way that you can do that is through Patreon. Any and all contributions make a huge difference, and if you're the kind of person who wants to support a channel like this, then you can find the links in the live chat and in the description below. That said, let's get on with the video. So much about cults applies to a wider societal context. Influence, identity alterations, people banding together and more. It's just that when you're looking at a cult, those things usually are used by someone or a group of people in order to get something out of other people, be it money, adoration, free labour, political power, the list goes on. In this video I want to explore some of the parallels between cults and some aspects of our society which have the tendency to render unpleasant consequences. In particular in regards to celebrity and prominent figures within a given community. I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not sitting here just being like, society is a cult, because my positions are not quite that lacking in nuance. But there are some interesting parallels between destructive cults and some of the facets of our society which have a tendency to turn sour. And if left unchecked, as they have been in many cases, these things can become toxic. We humans have a terrible habit of raising people up well past where they belong, of putting them on pedestals and more or less refusing to see the bad things about them, only seeing the good things about them. You see this a lot in cults with how members are conditioned to more or less see their leader as someone who doesn't have any flaws. And you see a similar kind of thing with the idealization of celebrities and prominent figures in various communities. Regarding cults and undue influence, cult leaders and toxic partners in one-to-one relationships might create a sort of false sense of transparency to hide behind. They establish a norm of telling the other person or people everything and say that they do, while withholding certain damning information. A lot of leaders will say the truth, but they'll dress it up in a way that looks good on them, and they'll sometimes skip over the important bits and focus on the less important bits, straw man the important bits, that kind of thing. Private details are shared selectively in order to create a narrative of bravery, of learned wisdom, and of authenticity, which is used to elevate the person that's doing the manipulating above everybody else in the group, everybody else in the world in some cases. I've also heard of gaslighting being used in situations like this as well, where they'll use honesty, the established honesty, to discredit assertions and criticisms made about their version of reality while continuing to push their version of reality. Inside a cult, the leader is elevated above the cult members, not because of any real achievements, not because of any real superiority in any quantifiable way necessarily, but because of manipulation, because of control of the person's environment, because of the hindering of the person's feedback between their environment and their own thinking and their own thoughts and feelings, which that feedback is really important for a person to develop their own opinions, to develop their own point of view on things. And there's a bunch of cat hairs, and have their own personality grow, develop, be maintained, if you like, to be a normal part of their life. You know, if that feedback loop is shut down, then the person becomes more a product of their environment, as far as I understand it. Outside of destructive cults, where celebrity is concerned, there's less overt manipulation and coercion used in order to elevate the person above, and sometimes, not as much these days, but sometimes these celebrities are going to be people who actually do have abilities, they have achieved something, or they do have virtues that we should be looking to, or could be looking to, in order to learn from or aspire to be like in some way. Sometimes, not all the time. In both cases, people are idealized and they are elevated to a position of more or less near perfection. We don't want to entertain the bad things about the person. We don't want to think that the person is bad or wrong or whatever in any way. And when it turns out that this person isn't perfect after all, when it turns out they've made a mistake or that they've been or done or said something that is beyond redemption or deemed to be beyond redemption or is genuinely bad, as is sometimes the case, all hell breaks loose. What's interesting is that the response does tend to be different. If a person makes a mistake, comes out and is honest about that and takes ownership of that mistake and then apologizes for that mistake earnestly, then people are going to be more willing to... What is going on? These cats are... Wow. We took down that shelf, that one, because they kept going over there and climbing up and all the rest of it. So one less shelf, but that's just because they're just emitters of mischief. Okay, so what's interesting is that when a person makes a mistake and then they come forward and they own up to that mistake and they apologize, they try to make reparations, they make amends, so on and so forth, people are more likely to stick with them, and understandably so. Unless they've done something that's really horrible and that there's no way that they're going to be able to make amends for that. That happens if they get ahead of the uproar though. If they get caught out doing it, then it's going to go the other way. If they're not going to own up to it, then it goes the other way. And at that point, then if someone makes an apology after they've been caught out, then there's going to be some people who just see that as damage control. I tend to incline more to that. I don't always tend to see those kinds of apologies as genuine, heartfelt apologies when someone has been caught out doing something and then they've been pressured basically into apologising. I'm like, okay, maybe that's genuine, but if they're only saying that after they've been forced or shamed or whatever, then all of that goes out the window though when we're looking at cult leaders, because a cult leader does not want to ever admit that they've done anything wrong. As far as the cult leader is concerned, they are the moral standard. They're the thing. They're the benchmark, the measuring stick or whatever, by which everyone else should be judged. So they cannot make a mistake. The only time you might hear a cult leader apologising is when they're trying to spin the narrative, and it's probably not really an apology. It might sound like an apology, but just see if they actually say the word sorry, And they have this automatic defence which clicks in when they realise that they might have done something that will have negative consequences. Not that they might have done something that's wrong, but something that's going to look bad on them, or that's going to affect their power or their control or the comfortable little life they've created for themselves. They just explain it away. They add to this complex law that they've created for the cult. They create some spiritual or metaphysical justification for the whole thing. People like Bentinho Massaro, and I think Muji, I'm just going on memory on that one, have berated their followers and then later justified it as being loving or innately spiritual in some convoluted way. In both cases, whether contrived or more organic, when we're looking at situations where people have been idealized, where people are being seen as having no capacity to make mistakes, or where we just aren't willing to accept that they might have done something that's bad or wrong, or then I think we're looking at a point of view, a perspective that is sorely lacking, a point of view that is missing the reality perhaps of what humans are actually like. I think that idealization goes a little bit past what we might agree is a well-rounded, nuanced and grounded view of what humans are like. Cult leaders will do anything to avoid taking responsibility for the problems they've caused or the pain they've caused or whatever. They will do anything they can to avoid the consequences of their actions. As far as I can see, in most cases, a cult leader needs their following more than the following needs them. And when push comes to shove, the average cult leader isn't above playing the victim and bolstering the group's persecution complex in order to avoid doing what any decent person would do when they've done something wrong, when they've caused harm. Facing facts and apologising. In cults, when the truth comes out, when it becomes clear that the cult leader is not someone who is worthy of being followed, is not a leader that deserves to be followed, there's a slight chance that the cult may dissolve. I've got hair in my mouth as I'm talking. There's a slight chance the cult may dissolve. It's possible that it will. I feel like it might be optimistic to say that it will, but there's a chance that it will. Again, the cult leader will do anything they can to avoid that kind of thing happening. This is their lifeline, right? This is their whole life. This is their thing. They need this in some way, for whatever reason. If it doesn't dissolve, then cult life goes on, business as usual. If it does dissolve, then it's entirely possible that the cult leader and their closest followers, their inner circle, the true believers, will toddle off to somewhere else and carry on or start a whole new cult. Cult leaders are not above changing their name in instances like this. I mean, there's a lot of name changing in cults, both leaders and their followers. There's not many cult leaders that haven't changed their name. I can't think of many cult leaders that haven't changed their name. Either they've modified their name, they've added something to their name that shouldn't be there, or they've just flat out changed it and just added and made it something else. It's interesting that. And obviously the cult members sometimes will have their names changed too. In some cults that's common practice. It's part of the cult identity thing. But regarding the cult leader like sort of picking up and toddling off with a few core devotees, Andreas from the Buddhafield, the founder of the Buddhafield cult, leader of the Buddhafield cult, that is talked about in Holy Hell, the documentary Holy Hell, that comes to mind here. As I mentioned a minute ago, if a non-cult leader person makes a mistake and owns up to it honestly and makes an apology and all that, people are likely to stick by them. That's understandable. But in the cases where the wrongdoer clearly isn't sorry about what they've done, then in the eyes of some, they're off the pedestal. That's it, gone. Bye. For others still, it's as if they see the person as more perfect. Their adoration becomes unshakable. They might even end up defending the person they've idealised and whatever they've done. And if you've read up on your cult-related stuff, then you're probably thinking cognitive dissonance. Actually, for anyone who's not familiar, Leon Festinger, the guy that developed the theory of cognitive dissonance, actually studied a UFO cult while he was building his theory and fleshing it out and making his predictions and so on. So even though cognitive dissonance does have far-reaching implications for humanity as a whole, it's always going to be linked to our darker side. It's always going to be linked to cults in some way. In an interesting way, I've kind of become part of call-out culture without ever really intending to. The necessities of speaking about the damage that my former cult leader has caused and is causing have put me in a position where I don't really want to talk about her, because why would I? But I kind of have to sometimes in order to, move the discourse along and provide context for some of the things that I'm saying. So in a weird kind of way, I have become part of call-out culture in some sense. But I do try and be tasteful about it. I do try and do it tastefully and with a bit of humour and not getting too personal. And we'll come back to the whole talking about things that are personal in a minute, because that's really important with this, I think. Calling out happens both inside destructive cults and outside of destructive cults. Inside some cults, what you have is people being singled out for one reason or another and then being shamed into being more cult appropriate. That kind of thing does happen outside of cults as well, but they're not being shamed into being more cult appropriate, they're just being shamed into being more like whatever the people who are shaming them want them to be. In some cases, people do leave cults and speak out, and they typically do that with a lot less humiliation involved. They're typically less interested in humiliating the cult leader, the cult group, whatever. Obviously, there might be an element of that sometimes for some people, but generally speaking, that's the case. If you've been subscribed to this channel for a while, then you'll know that that's sort of how I came back to YouTube. I was telling my story. I was talking a bit about my experiences. A case more recent than my own is Sarah Landry's. She was inside a cult, she woke up, and now she's on YouTube and she's speaking out about her former cult and the damage that it's doing. Outside of cults, you have people being called out on social media, on Twitter with hashtags like cancel so-and-so and whatever. Here there's an air reminiscent of that scene in Game of Thrones with the bell. Public humiliation is very much commonplace with this kind of calling out, and it's more or less the internet version, the modern internet version of sticking someone in the stocks and lobbing gone-off fruit at their head. In both cases, I feel like some of the urge to speak out, at least some of the urge to speak out, comes from like a kind of disappointment with the person that you previously idealised. Like, you thought they were great, you thought the sun shined out of their ass, and then it turns out it doesn't. the sun doesn't shine out of their ass, actually. Who knew? I want to be clear that I'm not defending people who have done genuinely horrible things. I'm just looking at the parallels. And regarding cults, we can't overlook the artificial groundwork that's been laid to make the cult leader look, feel, seem like they are perfect in some way. With cults, we're looking at a deliberate effort to construct a false image of a leader, which then the followers are unduly influenced into taking on. In cancel culture, there's a tendency to dehumanize and demonize a wrongdoer. And of course, everyone has an opinion, everyone thinks their opinion matters, and everyone wants their opinion heard. What results is a barrage of toxicity in a display of public humiliation. And in a no-holds-barred onslaught, the wrongdoer is shamed into giving a forced apology that the righteous revel in and the suspicious disbelieve. The issue with this isn't even that it's probably not the most effective way to go about solving the problem. The biggest issue, I think, is that this is moral outrage crammed into a scattergun and fired at will with the ends justify the means kind of mentality that isn't really humanity at its best. And you've got to ask, what do we want from this? Like, what are we trying to achieve here? What do we want out of this? The approach is usually focused on the person and not the thing that the person's done. It seems much easier to emotionally take it out on the person rather than taking a step back, looking at the situation from a wider perspective and evaluating the thing that was done in perhaps a little bit more of a dispassionate way. And as someone who has been part of it, I do find myself asking, was there ever a point, was there ever a purpose that was refined enough to be actionable within this particular campaign of moral outrage? I do try and avoid being part of that personally, and when I'm talking about something, I want it to be about the thing that's been done, you know, the issue at hand, rather than the person that did it. And I do try to make sure that's the case if I can. Don't want to make it about that person because guaranteed they're not the only one doing it, right? Even in the case of cult leaders, they're not the only one doing that. Cult leaders are laughably similar to each other, actually. Obviously, like I mentioned before, bringing the person up a little bit to kind of ground what you're saying, to give it context and to move the conversation along a little bit is useful, but I'm inclined to try to separate the issue from the person, even if I am naming the person as well. Like, I think you can bring the person's name into it without making it all about them and just talking about what they're doing rather than going ad hom, you know. The way that I think about it seems to be that calling out, it seems to be more directed towards someone, and speaking up is more directed towards something. I know that that's not how everyone uses it, but that's kind of a distinction in my head, at least. And there's a plethora of ways to go about doing any of these things, but yeah, I really feel like, at least for me, where I'm concerned, it's really important to try to focus on the thing. And also, not to focus on who I think that person is, because I don't know that person. I don't know what's going on in their head. I don't know whether they're healthy. I don't know whether they have some problems that are undiagnosed or whatever. So, yes, I think it's important to just look at the damage and to try to raise awareness of the thing that's being done rather than just attacking a person viciously or whatever. And having open conversations about damaging things goes a long way towards inoculation, I think. And I think, as I outlined in this video, there are some similarities between cults and call-out culture. I don't necessarily think that means we can say that call-out culture is cult-like, but there are some similarities which I think should be red flags. It should be a warning for us if we're about to jump on the bandwagon with these kinds of things, that we might be engaging in something that may not be that productive, may not be effective, and actually might be toxic. Because, really, do we need more toxicity in this world? I think we can all agree that we could do with a little less cultiness. Anyway, I hope that you got something from this video and that you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the kind of content I'm making and you want to help support the channel, then as I mentioned at the beginning, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's links below and in the live chat if you want to do that, if you're the kind of person that wants to support a channel like this. While we're on Patreon, I need to say a big thank you to my current patrons. I've actually got a few more since the last video, and I cannot be more grateful for that. Thank you guys for supporting me. I cannot be more grateful for your support. It means so much to me that you would support me, support this channel in the way that you're doing. But yeah, if you're not able to support the channel with Patreon right now, then please don't forget to like and subscribe, and stick a comment below, share the video if you want to. If you think that someone you know might get something from this video, then that'd be amazing. Anyway, I'll bid you farewell for now, but if you want to stick around and watch more videos, then I'll see you in the next one.